The Curse of Hollow Lake Shadows Beneath the Surface. 1. The Hollow Lake Welcome Eats story begins with 5 friends Emily, Jake, Sarah, Ethan, and Molly taking a road trip to a remote cabin in the Adirondack Mountains. They've rented a cabin by the eerily named Hollow Lake for a week of fun. Unaware of the cursed history surrounding the area, the lake is said to be bottomless, swallowing anything that dares to venture into its depths. Upon arrival, the group notices strange symbols carved into the wooden beams of the cabin. The symbols resemble runes, but none of them can decipher their meaning. They dismiss it as part of the cabin's rustic charm. That night, while sitting by the fire, they hear faint whispers carried by the wind. And Emily swears she sees a figure standing at the edge of the woods. The others laugh it off, but unease begins to settle in. Point 2. The Forgotten Town. Next day, the group decides to explore the surrounding area. They stumble upon an abandoned town hidden deep within the forest. Its streets overgrown with vines and its buildings crumbling. There's a church in the center of the town with a bell tower that appears untouched by time. Inside, they find pews covered in dust and a massive, rotting altar above it. A mural depicts a hooded figure dragging souls into the depths of a black lake. Ethan finds an old journal in the church. Its pages describe the Hollow Ones, malevolent entities that emerge from the lake to claim their victims. The journal ends abruptly with the final entry reading, "They've come for me. Pray you never hear their whispers." As they leave the town, Sarah notices fresh footprints leading back into the woods, but they aren't theirs. 3. The lake's callback at the cabin. Molly becomes increasingly agitated. She insists she can hear someone calling her name from the lake. That evening, she wanders off, drawn to the water. The others find her standing knee-deep in the lake, staring at something beneath the surface. Jake pulls her out, but not before he glimpses a pale, eyeless face staring up at him from the water. The group decides to leave the next morning, but their car won't start. Jake tries calling for help, but there's no signal. The whispers grow louder that night, and the friends barricade themselves inside the cabin. Something scratches at the windows, and the symbols on the walls begin to glow faintly. 4. The vanishing morning. Ethan is gone. His bed is empty, and the front door is wide open. They find his flashlight by the lake, its beam pointing toward the water. Emily discovers wet footprints leading back to the cabin, stopping just outside the door. The footprints aren't Ethan's. Desperate, the remaining 4 decide to hike out of the area on foot. As they trek through the forest, they feel they're being watched. Sarah swears she sees figures darting between the trees, but no one else can confirm it. That night, they camp out in a clearing, but when they wake up, their supplies are gone, and strange symbols have been carved into the trees around them. 5. The bell tower. Group decides to return to the abandoned town, hoping to find clues or shelter. In the church, they ascend the bell tower, hoping to get a view of the surrounding area. From the top, they see the forest shifting unnaturally, as if the trees themselves are moving. They spot a figure standing in the middle of the town square, motionless. Suddenly, the bell rings, though no one touched it. The sound reverberates through the town, and the figure below tilts its head up to look at them. Its face is featureless, save for a wide, inhuman grin. 6. The Hollow Ones. That night, Emily dreams of the lake. In her dream, she's standing on the shore as pale, elongated figures emerge from the water, their mouths open in silent screams. When she wakes up, she finds the others staring at her. Her hands are covered in blood, and Sarah is missing. They find Sarah's body hanging from a tree outside the cabin, her eyes missing and her face twisted in terror. The runes on the cabin's walls are now glowing constantly, and the whispers have become deafening. 7. The Descent. With no other options, the remaining 3 decide to confront whatever is in the lake. They craft makeshift weapons and head to the shore. As they approach, the water begins to churn violently. The pale figures emerge, dragging themselves onto land. Their bodies are emaciated, their limbs unnaturally long, and their mouths stretch impossibly wide. The group fights desperately, but Molly is dragged into the water. Jake and Emily manage to flee back to the cabin, but they know it's only a matter of time before the creatures come for them. 8. The final stand. Barricaded in the cabin, Jake and Emily make a plan to destroy the creatures. They find old lantern oil and decide to set the forest on fire. hoping to drive the entities back into the lake. As they prepare, the creatures attack, breaking through the windows and doors. In the chaos, Jake sacrifices himself to give Emily a chance to escape. She sets the forest ablaze and runs, but the fire seems to have no effect on the creatures. They chase her to the edge of the lake, where she collapses, exhausted. 9. The hollow lake claims its own as the creatures close in. Emily looks into the lake and sees hundreds of faces staring back at her, the faces of everyone who has ever disappeared. She realizes the lake is alive, feeding on fear and despair. The creatures drag her into the water, and the last thing she hears is the sound of the bell ringing in the distance. 10. The new arrivals. Weeks pass, and a group of 6 thrill-seekers arrives at the cabin. They're drawn by online rumors about the lake and its eerie legends. Among them are Alex, a paranormal investigator, Mia, a skeptic podcaster, Tom, a survivalist, and their friends Chris, Rachel, and Hannah. They find the cabin in disrepair but decide to stay, thinking the legends are nothing more than local folklore. The group soon discovers Emily's journal hidden under a loose floorboard. Her entries detail the horrors she faced and her warnings to stay away from the lake. The skeptics laugh it off, but Alex is intrigued. That night, Rachel hears whispers in her room and sees a shadow move across the wall. 11. The black fog. Next morning, a dense black fog envelops the area, cutting off all visibility. The group's GPS devices and compasses malfunction, leaving them disoriented. They decide to stay close to the cabin until the fog clears, but as night falls, they hear distant screams echoing from the lake. Chris ventures out to investigate but doesn't return. The others find his flashlight near the shore, its beam pointing into the fog. When they call out his name, a distorted voice mimics their cries, sending them running back to the cabin. 12. The plague of shadows. As the fog persists, shadows begin appearing inside the cabin. They move independently, creeping along the walls and ceilings. Tom tries to burn one with a torch, but the shadow engulfs him, leaving behind only his hollowed-out clothes. The group realizes the shadows are feeding on their fear and resolve to stay calm, but the whispers grow louder, making it impossible to concentrate. 13. The midnight ritual. Alex discovers a hidden compartment in the church's altar containing an ancient book bound in human skin. The book describes a ritual to banish the Hollow Ones, but it requires a blood sacrifice. Mia refuses to participate, calling it nonsense, but Alex insists it's their only hope. As they argue, Hannah begins convulsing, her eyes rolling back as she whispers in an unknown language. The group restrains her, but she warns, they're already here. 14. The forest awakens. Trees around the cabin begin to move, their branches clawing at the windows like skeletal fingers. The group tries to flee, but the forest itself seems to shift, leading them back to the lake no matter which direction they run. They discover a circle of ancient stones near the water's edge, each one engraved with the glowing runes from the cabin. 15. The forgotten children. At the stone circle, they see the ghostly apparitions of children dressed in tattered clothes. The children chant in unison, their voices blending with the whispers. Alex recognizes them from the mural in the church. They're the lake's first victims, he says. They were sacrificed to summon the Hollow Ones. The children point toward the water, and the surface begins to ripple violently. Something massive is rising. 16. The Leviathan. A colossal, serpentine creature emerges from the lake, its scales glistening with an otherworldly light. Its eyes are empty sockets, and its mouth is filled with rows of jagged teeth. The creature lets out a deafening roar, shaking the ground. The group scatters, but Rachel is caught in its gaze and dragged into the water by shadowy TNDRILS. 17. The sacrificializing. They have no choice. Alex and Mia perform the ritual described in the book. It requires them to carve the runes into their own flesh and chant an incantation while standing in the stone circle. As they do, the lake's waters turn black, and the Leviathan screams in agony. 18. The betray. Mia turns on Alex, stabbing him with a ceremonial dagger. You'll be the sacrifice, she says, pushing him toward the lake. But before he falls, the shadows claim her, dragging her screaming into the darkness. 19. The final escape. Alex, bleeding and weak, stumbles back to the cabin. He sets it ablaze, hoping to destroy the evil once and for all. As the flames consume The structure, the whispers fade, and the fog begins to lift out. 20. The Hollow's lullaby. Years later, hikers find a new cabin standing by the lake. Inside, they discover a mural depicting Alex's final moments and a journal warning them to leave. They laugh it off, unaware of the whispers beginning to stir. 21. The unending cycle. New visitors begin hearing whispers almost immediately. At night, they see shadows creeping along the walls, their shapes growing more distinct with each passing hour. One of the hikers, Olivia, is drawn to the lake despite warnings from her friends. She returns drenched and silent, her eyes distant. 2. The return of the Leviathan. Hikers witness the Leviathan re-emerge from the lake, its massive form shrouded in a glowing mist. It's larger now, and its roar seems to shake the very ground. Beneath them, the group attempts to flee but finds themselves trapped in a maze of moving trees, the forest closing in around them. 3. The hallucinations. Lake's power begins affecting the hikers' minds. They see visions of loved ones calling to them from the water, their voices begging for help. One by one, the hikers succumb to the whispers, walking into the lake and vanishing beneath its surface. 24. The final ritual. Only Olivia and one other hiker, Ethan, remain. They find Alex's journal and discover a passage about a final ritual to banish the Hollow Ones permanently. It requires them to destroy the stones at the edge of the lake. But doing so will awaken the full fury of the Leviathan. 5. The Leviathan's wrath. Olivia and Ethan destroy the stones, shattering them with heavy rocks. The Leviathan lets out a deafening scream, and the lake begins to boil. Shadows pour from the water, engulfing the forest in darkness. Olivia sacrifices herself to distract the Leviathan, allowing Ethan to escape. 26. The endless whispersidon. Now the sole survivor reaches the nearest town and warns the locals about Hollow Lake. But as he speaks, he hears the faint sound of whispers in his own mind. The Hollow Ones have marked him. And the cycle will begin again. The story ends with Ethan's reflection in a window, his eyes slowly turning black.